Hey, this is Peter Bell, and I am in the beautiful wine country of Central Coast, California, in Santa Maria, north end of Santa Maria, in Santa Barbara County. I serve Redeemer OPC, Redeemer Orthodox Presbyterian Church, on the north end of Santa Maria. We meet at Temple Bethel, which is right there, Temple Bethel, at 11 a.m. for Sunday service and 9:45 a.m., so just before that, for Sunday school for all ages. We have kids Sunday school, adult Sunday school, or all Sunday school at 9:45. You can find us at discoverredeemer.org with one R. Again, discoverredeemer.org. We have a bunch of activities throughout the week, but most importantly, Sunday we have the gospel preached, the sacraments administered, and church discipline faithfully brought out. So I hope to see you here at Redeemer OPC in Santa Maria, Central Coast, wine country of Santa Barbara. Hope to see you.
Hey everybody, this is Pastor Danny Hyde from the Oceanside United Reformed Church. I want to invite you out to our church. We meet in sunny Southern California, here in San Diego, and we meet at the Army Navy Academy in Carlsbad, right along the ocean, as you can see, the Pacific. And we meet every Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning. We hear the Word of God, we hear the gospel preached. We have the Lord's Supper every Sunday morning, and then we have Sunday school at about noon for kids. We come again together at 5 o'clock every night, Sunday night, for teaching, prayer, and singing. And then we also have various midweek groups, Bible studies, men's, women's, and also other Bible studies as well throughout the week. So I want to invite you out to worship with us. If you know anybody in the area here in North County of San Diego, invite them as well. Let them know. You can find out more about us on our website, oceansideurc.org, or also on all those various social media. You'll find us as well. God bless.
Hello, everyone. Yet once again, it's another day of fresh grace and mercy. This is the Guilt, Grace, Gratitude podcast, where we bridge the gap to Reformed Christian theology for your listening pleasure. And today we're on a season 7 episode. Season 7, we are finding Jesus throughout all of Scripture. And today's episode, we're going to be focusing on just the book of Numbers. And of course, our third co-host today is going to help us out, just like all the episodes this season, Dr. Danny Hyde. And of course, Peter's here as well, and I'm Nick. So if you guys go to our show notes, you're going to find some resources. Of course, during this season, we're using some books and resources, of course, the Bible, to help us with unpacking each episode. I know that Peter and Danny throughout the episode kind of give some resources, but since I have the mic right now, I just kind of take the opportunity to let you guys know the NIV Biblical Theology Study Bible with D.A. Carson, General Editor, is a very helpful guide. He really does a lot of good background description before each book in the Bible, so you get to really have a good context and understanding of what's going on in the theological themes and whatnot. And then, of course, the Introducing the Old Testament book by Erdman's by Robert Hubbard and Andrew Dearman is a very helpful book. It goes obviously through each book in the Old Testament. Pretty easy to not too cumbersome per book. It just kind of lays out things in a lay level understanding. So, and of course, I got to give a shout out to the Bible Project. Their videos are very helpful for a quick snapshot of understanding, even on a visual aspect on YouTube, just understanding each book in the Bible and what it's all about. So I put all those together with obviously my daily Bible reading. And then these two gentlemen here who are both pastors obviously can help with this conversation as well. And they know this stuff way better than me. So yeah, we'll get into this conversation. But also before we jump in, our show notes, if you want to find a local church to call home, there needs to be more Reformed churches out there. So NAPARC is a umbrella kind of collection of a lot of different Reformed denominations, URC, OPC, PCA, and others. So if you are interested in church planting or finding a church to call home, engage with that, ask us questions and things like that. And then also just more about Dr. Hyde and his work and what he does and what he's up to. And then, of course, find us on YouTube. Subscribe to us on YouTube, watch these conversations via video, also engage with us on Twitter and Instagram. That's a good way to just kind of see our daily content and interactions. And then Of course, it's a podcast app that you can just download and listen to all of our videos if it's just audio only format is what you'd like. So let's get into this conversation. We got a very interesting book in the Bible. We kind of like right after Leviticus. It's kind of like we're still in the Pentateuch. Picking up where Leviticus leaves off. Moses is still the author. We got one more book in the Pentateuch after this one, Deuteronomy. But this book, Numbers, describes 1 year at they just finished 1 year at Mount Sinai, and it's dated probably, and this is debatable, between 1450 to 1240 BC. How the Israelites showed distrust in God and unbelief, but God remained faithful to his people and his promises, and he still honors their choices, even though they want to kind of waste their lives away if they choose rebellion over obeying. So this book goes over an entire generation of those first Exodus people that rejected, had more unbelief in, God's promise to Abraham. So the leader is Moses still. Aaron is still one of the priests, and God still has his plan fulfilled, but it's just delayed to their children. So let's go into this conversation, and then we'll kind of lay out the questions and whatnot. So I'll stop talking, let Peter and Danny introduce themselves.
I was about to say that Nick has described the entire of the book of Numbers. I think we're all good now.
Yeah.
I was gonna say too, if Bible plans have not died already in the book of Leviticus, they're dead under the ground, 6 feet under for most people in the book of Numbers, because sometimes those first 4 chapters of census can get bogged down. So yeah, Denny, what do you think, generally speaking, about the book of Numbers?
Yeah, it's not the most exciting book for people because it's just the name, right? So they kind of like skip over it, like, oh, Numbers, and then like you see there's like multiple there's multiple censuses,
Sensei,
the Latin, yeah.
census.
Yeah, as people see, you see census, you're like, oh, okay, it's names and how many people they had in their family.
Census is like it's like ability to skip over. It's like, oh, okay, I could just skip over these next 4 chapters.
Yeah, so I think
I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying that's what people usually think. It's like it's licensed to skip over these chapters.
Mm-hmm. To zone out.
There's obviously some well-known stories in Numbers that people generally, kind of like hear about, in their kind of generic Bible, understanding. Like, okay, the 40 years of wandering. There's like this, Jesus mentions like, the serpent in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Just like it was lifted up, so I'll be lifted up. He tells that to the disciples in John. Chapter 3, I believe it is.
He tells it to Nicodemus in chapter 3. Yeah,
the Nicodemus. That's right. Yeah. Right before right next to the God so loved the world passage.
It's like 10 verses before. Yeah.
Yep. So you have the spies who go in, like the grapes that are like the size of like watermelons. And
was that a product placement, Nick? I just saw your Seahawks mug right in front of the right in front of the cam. I saw him lifted up, and then
my first place team there.
It's like sponsored by the Seahawks, and then just put it on his throat.
So, anyways, yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of stuff that might seem tedious, and it has some like famous stories, so people don't really make much of it, other than kind of like maybe pick and choose for a Sunday school lesson here or there, here or two.
Yeah, for sure. No, Peter, anything else?
No, I think, well, as we'll see, maybe not too dissimilar. I guess if Leviticus focuses a lot more on temple duties, priestly duties, this might focus a little bit more on like, it kind of looks like not like things are breaking down, because things have already been breaking down, but you just see a little bit more rebellion against God, against his promise, against the law. But you also see, like we saw in the first 3 books of the Pentateuch, you also see, like you said, God's faithfulness undergirding all things, and saying, regardless of the people's faithlessness, I will continue to be faithful to my covenant.
Yeah, it should be assuring, because it shows that we screw up and rebel, and he still fulfills his promises. So going into the structure, and this is, play around with this, please. Like, I'm sure there's other recommended structures of understanding it, but the one I found, and Dr. Hyde, agree, disagree, give it a different one. But the one I found was you can break Numbers up into 3 major sections, and there's 2 traveling trips in between the two, in the middle. So I'll describe it. So the first section, chapters 1 through 10, is the wilderness of Sinai, and then chapters 10 through 12, they're traveling, and then the second section would be wilderness of Paran, which is chapters 13 to 19. Then they're traveling in chapters 20 to 21, and then thirdly, the wilderness of Moab, and that's chapters 22 to 36. Thoughts, comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
esteemed Dr. Danny, I think, has some comments.
Yeah, I mean, I'm preparing. I guess at the point of this airing, I've already started, but
yeah,
I'm preparing right now to teach through Numbers for our congregational Bible study starting in January. So yeah, in general, there's other kind of like ways to organize and to slice up the pie. So like one Jewish commentator talks like organizes it chronologically. So like you have 1 to 10, verse 10 verse 11. That's dealing with like basically like 1 month. That all that period happens in a 1 month. So 1 to 10 is like a 1 month period. They're in the wilderness, and then like 10-12 to 21-9. It's not dated, but like that's the 40 years. And then 21-10 to 36-13 is all in 5 months. It's pretty cool. Like he breaks it down chronologically.
So it's like it slows down and then goes really fast.
Yep.
And slows down and goes really fast.
And then like Nick gave like in general, like there's also like ways to kind of like do it topographically. So like they're in Sinai, roughly speaking, 1 to 10, and they're like kind of like around Kadesh, like 10 to 20. And then they're moving from Kadesh to Moab, like the plains of Moab, like all the way from 20 to the end. So there's like different ways chronologically, topographically. There's also like some thematic, some cool thematic ones I've seen. I'm trying to find one of them I had written down.
Now, what's thematic mean?
Thematic,
so like just like like thematic, like the topics,
like themes.
So like what? Yeah, like one author does an outline based on the census. So like chapter 1 to 25:18. It's like a huge chunk. That's the end of that first generation that sinned and died in the wilderness. So that that first census, right? And then later on, chapter 26:1, and then all the way to the end. So that's only 10 chapters.
First census and then second census on like the last
second census. So like there's one census beginning, those people, generally speaking, die, the people that disbelieve. And then you have like, that second census, so that new generation. So it's kind of like a death and a resurrection almost theme. Like the first birth of the Israelites, like second birth, if you will, kind of thematically. So
that's good.
In general, that's a good, the outline you gave is a good, helpful one. It's, not the easiest book to kind of outline and organize, but
it's one of the harder books to outline. Yeah, this is probably Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy are probably on the not the easier side, but like they're slightly easier to slice up in more like refined sections. And the Numbers is a little more difficult to refine.
So going in, maybe I mispronounced this, but Bonabar, and that is the meaning.
Bamidbar.
So say it correctly for us.
Bamidbar.
Is in, so Bamidbar. So Bamidbar.
Midbar. Cool. So
Bamidbar,
and that's really the meaning in the wilderness, which translates to Numbers. So what does Numbers mean in the context of this book's theological theme? So we said the original word of what it is and translates to in the wilderness, and why it translates actually to the word in English Numbers, but why even this term, this word for the book? What does that point to, the theological theme?
Yeah, this, I guess, and Danny wrote some notes on this too, so I'll let him dive into this further. Because Bamidbar, in the wilderness, doesn't make much sense with our English translation of the Septuagint, arithmoi, which is Numbers. Is like, where on earth there's Septuagint, or where do we get this Numbers from wilderness? Because they seem like two opposing things, but they both play a rather large part in this book in general.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I mentioned in the previous episodes, like normally, like according to Jewish usage, like the first word or two even is generally speaking the title of the book, right? So like we call the first book of the Bible Genesis, but that comes from the first Hebrew word, Bereshit, which is in the beginning, or like Exodus, the first the first two words of in the Hebrew title, We'ele Shemot, like these are the names. So the first word of Numbers is just the Vav, and
yeah.
and Midbar is actually like the fifth word. So, so
even though one of the words, the bar, is still in that first word, it just has a different meaning in that first word.
So, and that like that. So like the Septuagint translators gave it the title arithmoi, numbers.
Like arithmetic, which you'll hear that like numbers.
Yeah. So it's related. It's just related to the census, right? Like these numbers of the tribes and how many men
the rather large census kind of thing. So, there's like, oh yeah, numbers. This makes sense.
But so if it would have just been named, in the wilderness or wilderness wandering, it probably would have been more exciting for people to read it. But then we're stuck with numbers. So there we go.
If we had, if number 4 in the Pentateuch was in the wilderness, I feel like Bible plans would not have stopped at numbers. Oh yeah, this is kind of cool.
But like you asked, like what's the significance, perhaps of like numbers and whatnot. It's these like I mentioned, like there's two censuses, two censii, sensei, not sensei though.
What is the plural of census?
Well, like censii, like the Latin
censuses,
right?
Plural census.
We just say censuses, censuses, but
that just sounds weird.
It just doesn't really flow off the tongue very well.
No, so numbers is easier to say.
So the Lord commands Moses to tell the tribes to get all their heads of their families together, and they have this long they have this long census. They all register their names, the names of the families, how many men they had that were 20 years and above, because they could go to war. And they number them off. Like that's the first chapter.
People don't realize the census here is not just like a straight census. This is like a war census. They're preparing for war.
The Lord's going to send them into the promised land. They're going to have to fight. And so it's preparing them for this battle. And we'll come to this, but later on, they when they get ready for the battle, they send in some spies to kind of like, hey, scope it out, and then it doesn't go very well, and so that's why they're wandering for 40 years. And then towards that end of that wandering, there's another census. People have died. That generation that disbelieved is now buried. There's another census, and so like there's same tribes and so forth, but now there's different numbers, and those are the ones who are going to the promised land, through with Joshua later on. It makes it kind of weird because then you got you like Deuteronomy then comes in between the end of Numbers and Joshua. Because Deuteronomy kind of
tremendously chronological from Numbers to Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy is kind of like pauses and gives us like theological. It's basically like sermons. It helps
you make sense of like what they call it, the historical books, kind of.
Or
fancier term like Deuteronomistic history. Like this is how the people did under the law.
So it's basically the book of these. The armies of the Lord, and they're going to go into the land. They don't believe, so then they wander, and then they get numbered again to go into the land. So there you go.
And there could be something here, and I won't make too much of this, but there could be something here of like it's a rather large nation at this point, and so it has, in some sense, kind of multiplied, increased upon this land, and now they're going to war, and so there is, even just in the census itself, a sense like this place is expanding exactly how the Lord had promised, but it's certainly not as we see during the war. It's certainly not because of Israel's obedience. It's because of God's promise in his covenant.
I feel like Leviticus and Numbers are like the books that help you. They may be a little harder to get through, but they're like building on the story. They're getting the groundwork because if it's like watching a movie or a series where you remember the beginning is like, oh, it was really slow in the beginning. It was hard to get through that beginning, but I'm glad I did because it built the characters. It built slowly built up the drama, and then the exciting. Then by the time the fun stuff comes, you can understand it better.
And it's somewhat foreign from us too. There's a lot of this stuff that just doesn't make sense to us in modern day. There's a lot of these places that we don't know where they are necessarily, or they're destroyed. So there's a lot of not unknowns, but there's just more foreignness to us today in a lot of these books, especially so Numbers.
Sure. So getting into kind of how we're more just pointing to Christ, because I mean, we could talk about a lot of stuff. Biblical theology can go in a lot of, just spend a lot of time in different categories, but we're focusing on how this is specifically seeing Christ in throughout the scriptures. So some things, some landmarks, some Jesus landmarks that I see, and then I'm sure I'm missing some more. So add more, and then, but the ones I saw was like definitely. We'll talk about Moses striking the rock, not once but twice. The significance of that, the bronze snake on a cross at the end of Numbers, the Levites and priests, and then the smoke coming out of the tabernacle that guides them, and then really interesting, the Balaam's blessings and prophecy, where he was asked by the king of Moab to lay out curses, but he could only speak blessings, and then he saw prophecy too, of a king of Israel. But how do these major events, and maybe I'm missing some in Numbers, actually are real examples of pointing forward to Jesus, literally as typological?
Yeah, I'll add two more. One smaller that's maybe a little less known, but still there. It's Phinehas's obedience. I think this is towards the end or middle-ish of Numbers, and then the number 6 benediction, the blessing of Aaron. The Lord keep you, the Lord bless you, his face to shine upon you, his countenance to turn towards you. I think Michael Morales in his book, I think Exodus Old and New, I think it's in the NSBT series, he talks about this blessing. And there's another book, I think it's Michael Glotto from RTS. I'm blanking on, I think it's The Lord Bless and Keep You. I think that's the book. It's from Crossway. It's recent. It's within the last few months. But both of them kind of wax on number 6, the blessing, especially as it relates to kind of tabernacle language with the lampstand over the showbread. And very similar with the high priest blessing the people. So that's also, I think, a rather strong marker of the gospel as well. At least God's face shining upon his people, which you'll see later on in Numbers, and especially closer to this, right after this is unfaithfulness. And I think right before this is unfaithfulness too, at least around the blessing. So you get, some more explicit blessing language in this as well. Danny, what do you think?
No, yeah. I mean, I think we mentioned the last or 2 episodes ago, Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness, and the Lord is standing there on the rock, and he strikes the rock. So the Lord, we said, took the punishment that the Israelites deserved. And then because of that, the water comes out of the rock. Paul tells us, Rabbi Saul, I like to remind my congregation, he's Rabbi Saul. Rabbi Saul reminds us that the rock was Christ.
1 Corinthians 10.
And isn't it interesting that when Jesus was on the cross and the centurion stabbed him in the side, that water came out?
Water and blood.
So, all those tie-ins. But then it's interesting, in Numbers, we're told a little more detail about what happened was that Moses hit the rock 2 times.
Which is not what he was told to do.
Yeah, he was told to strike it and the water would come out. He hits it twice.
But Danny, that's not a big deal. He was like, what's bad that Moses struck it twice? Like, what's the big deal? Once versus twice.
Well, he didn't do what God said to do. It's kind of a big deal, he was disobedient. He's supposed to be the mediator, right? And the savior, and the one who's liberated them, he's the typological savior, is the Messiah. He's to see the woman at that point. And he doesn't obey. So he's a disobedient. So he's not a Messiah. He's not the obedient one. That one's still to come. But he hits it twice, and because he hits it twice, then Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land. So he's banned, from,
because I guess even up to this point, up until him striking the rock twice, and maybe you can kind of put a qualifier around him talking to Yahweh before he talks to Pharaoh, and he says, "I can't speak," which, like, obedience is obedience. I don't really know where I fall on that, but it's like up until this point, he's a relatively strong candidate for obedience. Like, he does kind of what he's supposed to do.
Yep.
End of
Yeah.
Exodus, he does all the priestly duties in Leviticus. So you're kind of left wondering, by Moses the writer,
Yeah.
like is Moses, maybe Moses is the guy, and then he strikes the rock twice, and you're like, oh shoot, he's
Yeah.
the guy.
I mean, even the first chapter of the census, it tells us multiple times that as the Lord commanded Moses, so he did.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, up to this point, he's been
Relatively faithful, relatively
pretty
obedient.
pretty faithful dude, you know. And but then
And
he
he
hits it
strikes the
twice.
rock. Yeah, strikes the rock twice. Like, you guess, quote unquote, one act of disobedience.
Yep.
And he's told, yeah, you're not entering the land.
Yep. No land for you.
Yep.
Soup Nazi right there. No land
Yeah,
for you.
which kind of like emphasizes, like what Nick was saying, emphasizes that like it's not just like righteousness as compared to other people. It's perfect righteousness, perfect obedience, perfect holiness, everything. It's not just, okay, you have one mistake. Okay, that's pretty good.
Yep.
It's no, you got to do everything perfectly.
Yeah. He's automatically disqualified. Yeah.
So yeah, it's an awesome, it's an awesome typological picture of, one to come. And so is that bronze snake. I mean, they're all, the people that are cursed, they're bitten, and the Lord says, okay, take the same snake that just bit everybody and make a bronze one, put it up on a pole and hold it up, and everybody who looks at it, it's just,
is blessed by it.
It's like, it just sounds so crazy to us. Like anyone who looks at it is healed. Well, the gospel's foolishness, right?
I'm pretty sure it's the same Hebrew word for snake as it is in the garden too. Genesis 3, the nachash.
Nachash, yeah.
Because that's Genesis 3, where the serpent comes in as crafter, and he's the one obviously who tempts Adam and Eve to sin.
Yep.
And then with Numbers, then the serpent, the thing that cursed Adam and Eve, or I guess brought the curse in, is the very one who, by looking upon this, lifted up, they're blessed, which is
and I'm not sure.
reversal.
I haven't like studied enough to know, but I'm not sure if it ties into the snake serpent that Moses' staff turns into, that eats up the snakes of the
true, yeah,
of the Egyptian
I think it might
magicians.
I think it might be the same word. I'm not sure. I have to look it up.
It'd be cool to trace it out. I'd have to do that. That'd be kind of fun. But
I think it is.
Yeah, but then it all points to Jesus, because Jesus himself says it does.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This is the famous John 3, for God so loved the world. This is a few verses before that, where he's talking to Nicodemus, who's like the dude. He's the teacher of the Pharisees. He's anybody knows the Old Testament, it's Nicodemus walking in the night to Jesus, and he has no idea what he's talking about when he's talking to Jesus, as if like he doesn't know the Old Testament at all. He's talking about new birth. And he's like, what are you talking about? How am I supposed to enter my mother's womb and then come right back out for my second time? And then Jesus talks to him about the serpent that's laid upon the pole, which I think is John 3:14 and
14.
15.
Yeah, 3:14.
And the serpent as the serpent was lifted up, so the Son of Man will be lifted up as well. And then he gets into, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, whoever shall believe in him shall have eternal life, which is exactly what happened in Numbers. I mean, more or less, that they look upon him for their blessing.
Yep.
Yeah, it is interesting. He picks a serpent, and like you said, there's other ties to that, like Moses's staff.
Yeah, well, the serpent's under his sovereign control, so he can do whatever the heck he wants with the serpent.
Yeah, and the thing that cursed the Israelites in the wilderness becomes the thing that blesses them by their looking at it, which Jesus in John 3 ties looking to believing.
Yep. It's like a banner of sorts too. It's like a war banner.
Yeah.
So
and just like the serpent was the thing that cursed the Israelites, by biting them. In the same way, Christ is the one who is the curse. He became a curse for us, as Paul says, Rabbi Saul. Became a curse for us on the cross, but yet the thing that is the curse is also the blessing, because we look to him and believe in him, we find everlasting life, which, like I said a minute ago, like it seems so crazy, like and ridiculous, but that's why it's the gospel. It's not the wisdom of man, it's God's wisdom.
Yep. Totally. Yeah. And maybe too, like I was talking about with the Aaronic blessing, not the ironic blessing, the Aaronic blessing. I know if I don't say that very clearly, people are like, what are you saying? Ironic blessing? Aaronic blessing. Like Aaron. Aaronic blessing.
Aaron.
Yeah.
Aaron.
Oh my gosh. Aaron. Yeah. This is but the Aaronic blessing, to make it very clear, which I thought it was really cool reading Morales, and I've peeked at Galloto's work on number 6 too, where it seems like what Aaron is referring to is something of the lampstand in the tabernacle. And if you know what the lampstand does in the tabernacle, is they oil it up, they light it, and then the lampstand shows the showbread. And if people know what the showbread is, I think that it's generally acknowledged the showbread is the people of Israel. This bread that the light is shining upon this bread, the countenance upon this bread. And so when Aaron's blessing the people, he's also referring to the lamp, this light shining upon the people of God. So it's God's presence in front of his people even in the midst of the rebellion.
Yeah. Yeah, and moving on to
just one thing to mention about that that came to mind.
Yep.
So it says there in number 6 that oh goodness, where is it? Yeah, the Lord says, "So shall they put," speaking of the priest, "my name upon the people of Israel, and I'll bless them." So, and we know the way they did that was like they would lift their hands, right?
Yep.
Like,
yep.
That was a way of showing the blessing. And Jesus does this very thing, which I've always been kind of blown away by, where it says in Luke's gospel, the very, very end, after the resurrection, and then it says he led them out as far as Bethany, which is just east of Jerusalem, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them, and then he's taken up, and then they worship him. So Jesus, the great high priest, the final high priest, who's just offered the once and for all sacrifice for all sins, the last thing he does before he ascends is he lifts up his hands like an Aaronic priest. I mean, he's a priest in order of Melchizedek, going back to our episode on Genesis. But he lifts up his hands as a priest and blesses his disciples. So yeah, he puts the name of the Lord upon them, is what number 6 says, which is really cool.
Yeah, and even around this too, which I forgot as well, you get the Nazarite vow right before this. And what does Jesus describe? Jesus the Nazareth, and especially so this is like John 1, when I think it's Nathaniel asked him what kind of good comes out of Nazareth, because Nazareth is the Nazarite vow is like a priestly kind of vow of sorts. I don't think it's Levitical. I think it's because you're not of the priestly line, so you take out like a voluntary vow of sorts. But then it's also it's a Hebrew word for like a crown of sorts. Like a nezer is a crown, so you're also crowning yourself. So there's some cool stuff around this too, and you also get this in Judges 13, which we'll get to in a few weeks. But Judges 13, it's Samson, his mom basically makes the Nazarite vow for him, and so he's a Nazarene he's a Nazarite of sorts, because he's not supposed to shave his head, and he's not supposed to drink liquor. He's not supposed to do any of that stuff, which is all Nazarene. And that story with Samson in Judges 13, which refers back to number 6, is also a pretty striking parallel with Mary, with 1 Samuel 2. I forget the woman in 1 Samuel 2.
Hannah,
Hannah and her barrenness. There's just a ton of like parallels with number 6 and Nazarite vow and barrenness and all this stuff.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah, lots of awesome typological stuff.
Yeah. And then, so when we're looking at numbers, it's pretty clear there's just a lot of complaining from the Israelites, a lot of
Are you sure? Yeah. Is there complaining in the book of Numbers?
a lot of disobeying, a lot of unbelief, a lot of just they want to go. They're wanting to go back to Egypt. I mean, even Moses's brother and sister publicly kind of shame him, and they don't
12,
want him to the leader anymore. And they don't want the life in the wilderness anymore. They want to return to Egypt, even if that means slavery and death there. They want their 3 hots and a cot back in Egypt rather than a 40-year-long camping trip. So they don't want the food God's providing. And so we see in Numbers, we see God's people rebelling against him, and their dependence, whether they know it or not, is looking for a mediator. They need a mediator, whether they know it or not, whether it's Moses, Aaron, or priest. So how does this need for a mediator we see in Numbers reflected towards the gospel? And I saw, based on looking into it myself, First Timothy 2 and Hebrews 9 kind of helps with this.
Yeah, you need a mediator because the people can't see God face to face. They're unholy, they're unclean, they can't walk into his presence. So they need a priest to walk into the presence of God once a year to make the sacrifice that we talked about last week in the Day of Atonement, and to mediate the word. So he gets the word and then he proclaims the word. So not really priestly so much as prophetical, but which is one aspect of the mediator as well. And he sets up the laws with them on a kingly sort of aspect, but also proclaiming it through his prophetical office. So they need somebody between them and God, but it's not yet a God man. It's just a man who can receive this and then give it to people. Can't like really do anything about it himself. He could just proclaim it to them, and yes, he can mediate and not fight, but like kind of fight on their behalf a little bit. It's like, hey, don't destroy this people, even though they're rebelling against you. But he himself can't do anything because it's just a man. So they're still waiting for somebody who can do something, versus just a man who mediates between them and God.
Danny, anything else?
Yeah, just to tie that into the story of Numbers, Aaron and Miriam and Aaron, yeah, they're fighting their own brother, and
you got sibling rivalry, which reminds us a lot of another book in Genesis. You got a bunch of sibling rivalry in the book of Genesis, so you get somewhat similar in Numbers.
So you get that going on. Chapter 13, spies go in, they all come back. Joshua and Caleb give a good report. The other 10 are like, no, we can't go, they're too big, people don't believe. And then the people rebel. Hey, there's not enough graves out here, this and that and the other thing, we want to go back to Egypt. And so the Lord, so Moses has to intercede. That's the end of chapter 14, where the Lord, he relents after Moses intercedes, and Moses reminds them, Moses reminds the Lord, sorry, hey, if you don't bring the people to the promised land, like you said, all the nations around us are going to say, like, the Lord wasn't strong enough to do this. And so the Lord relents and he has mercy upon them, but as a consequence for their sins, he says those who saw the land and who heard the report, who didn't believe, they're not going to go. So that means a whole generation has to walk in circles until that generation dies off, but the Lord brings them in. So there's like the judgment and the salvation going on, but at the same time it's not ultimate. And so even Moses's intercession and his mediatorship, which is an amazing blessing to them, still is only a picture of a much greater servant to come, who will actually, as Hebrews says, he's able to save. Hebrews 7, he's able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him. So
yep, totally.
What about the significance of the Levites disobeying and rejecting Moses as the main priest mediator, and God intervened and he's like, no, I only speak to Moses face to face?
Well, that's true. Because the Levites are the ones who guard and protect the temple and do some of the sacrificing, and Moses doesn't do the inner holy of holies Aaronic sacrificing, but he does mediate between him and God, which is a particular office. So like you can see the offices are split, and they're not satisfied, I guess, with their own mandated office, and they're like, what I want at that office is like Moses is like, well, this is the office I was given. And we'll get clearer into this in Deuteronomy 18 once we get there, that Moses is a prophet in the line of prophets, like the prophet in the line of prophets, but that's not their office.
Oh, perfect. Before I get into my last question that just kind of brings everything home, there's a few other kind of loose ends I wanted to make sure I just kind of put out there. We got
to get to Balaam too.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, let's just talk about that real quick, because I did bring it up earlier, but the extra significance of Balaam and the king of Moab, and Balaam.
You got a really strange story of Balaam's ass. People are like, what do you do with this?
So what's going on with Balaam and the king of Moab? Can you just summarize that story and how it's significant to God's promises?
Yeah, Danny, why don't you start off on this one? I've something to add to it after you're done.
So, basically Balak, this king, and his name is like something like he who destroys, and he is like implied like whatever God, like he who he meaning this God destroys. So he's a king. He's a powerful king. His father's named him, this powerful king who's going to destroy his enemies, and in the name of his God and whatnot. And so, all of a sudden, like there's a huge dust cloud coming towards him in the wilderness. And it's like, according to Numbers 1, there's like 603,550.
There's a lot.
Male fighting men. And we hear, so just like for us as Americans, like we're hearing a lot about like, like migration to the United States.
Yeah.
And you hear a lot of people, in the news, in politics saying like, oh, there's X numbers of people, hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people have crossed the border, and most of them are like, male, male,
yeah.
Male men who are like of fighting age.
Yep.
So you hear that kind of language even today in politics. So like, just imagine being a king and, you're in this sort of dusty, arid, like kingdom, and you have this massive cloud coming towards you, and it's not a dust cloud from the wind. It's like, an army.
Mm-hmm.
And so he hires this prophet, this well-known like Mesopotamian prophet, Balaam, to curse, trying to dissuade them like theologically, because this guy can't win a battle like militarily, so he's got to like dissuade them theologically.
He's got to curse them in order to win.
Yeah, he's got to try to like get their spirits down to like not trust their God. And so he figures like, hey, I gotta use like, like we would say today, like misinformation. And I gotta use like like an online like
misinformation campaign, a smear campaign.
Basically. And so, this Balaam guy's like, okay, cool, I'm gonna make a wad of cash doing this. And it's like and it's crazy. Like he's on his way.
Wrong. Yeah.
He's on his way, ready to, to do his thing. And the story says like he's riding on this little donkey and he gets this little path, and the angel of the Lord has this flaming sword, or has a sword blocking the path, which should remind us of like the Lord, the angel in the Garden
of Eden, that, like replayed. Yeah, 100%.
Forbade them from going back in.
Yep.
Just all that angel of the Lord stuff we've seen so far in the Old Testament.
Kind of paradise language of sorts.
Yep. Yeah. And just like, and then, he's like, he doesn't see the angel, but the donkey does, which is so crazy. And so
it's almost like this guy is so self-interested that he can't see it. So his donkey's butt sees this of all things.
So as the donkey keeps going forward, he keeps kicking the donkey, like, because our donkey like wants to stop, and he keeps kicking it to go forward. And eventually like,
literally kicking against the goads.
He gets knocked off, and the donkey's like, seemingly like prostrated before the angel of the Lord. And he kicks the donkey, and then the donkey's like, what are you doing, bro? Like, like, why are you treating me this way? And like, so the donkey talks, right?
Yeah.
Which is nuts, just like snakes talk in the garden, right?
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah.
But
it's like, regardless of whatever man wants to do or doesn't want to, like, man doesn't want to worship Yahweh, and so even the created things will worship Yahweh.
And he's come to curse the Israelites, but now the Lord tells him like, you can only bless them. And the Lord reminds him of, the Lord repeats the language of Genesis, where he says like, when God tells Abraham, like, those who curse you will curse, those who bless you will bless.
Genesis 12 repeated.
Yeah. And he says that to him. It's like, hey, you can only say what I tell you to say. You can't curse these people. You have to bless them. And so then he gives like these blessings, and King Balak is like, what are you doing? Like, that's not what I paid you for. And he's like, I can only do what the Lord has told me to do.
I'm sorry, man. It's what's coming out.
And then like in those prophecies, there's all these like,
oh my gosh,
amazing,
the prophecies are something else.
Yeah, there's like always like amazing like messianic language, and a lot of
the most highly charged messianic language in the entire Pentateuch is right here.
So it's like describes Israel as a lion.
Yeah. Which is Genesis 49.
Like, yeah. That's gonna like stand up and like attack and devour its enemies. So it's like, and it has that language of like there's a scepter that's gonna rise up out of Israel that's gonna crush the forehead of Moab. That sounds like Genesis 49.
It's that line of Judah verbatim. Yeah.
It sounds
Psalm
like
2 a little bit as well.
Sounds like Genesis 3:15, the crushing of the seed of the serpents.
Yep.
There's a star that's going to rise. Like, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
Like all the language there is so like forward looking in the old to the coming of the Messiah. But yeah, so in other words, like the Lord, like when Nick, what Peter just said, like when Paul says, like, or when the Lord tells Paul, like, why are you kicking against the goats? Like, you can't fight against God. Like, you can't fight and win against God. And so, like, that's what Balaam is.
I will
showing.
turn creation on you. Yeah.
Yep. And the Lord's gonna, like, hey, you can't curse them or you'll be cursed. You got to bless them. And so, yeah, it's just like, it's like people only know the story for like the talking donkey.
Yeah.
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 But like,
yeah, you'll hear about that. Yep.
Not all the other stuff that's like points forward to Christ. Like,
Yeah, like
it's
so
just,
stinking
awesome.
Explicitly.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's so awesome.
One of the things I want to bring out, kind of adding to what Danny was saying, which honestly, I had never heard of this until Westminster, and it was confirmed actually by an English playwright, Dorothy Sayers. So she was in the 1940s. She wrote actually, Nick and I had one of her like editors recently. The name is
Catherine Weir.
Yeah, Weir. That's right. We had like the editor of her 12 kind of part Advent series, and Dorothy Sayers catches this when the Magi come in to find Jesus in quote unquote a manger in Bethlehem, although it's not really a manger, but that's for another day. But it's that star in the east that the Magi are following is a direct callback to Numbers 24, and I'll read it real quick, and people will hear what I'm saying. This is Numbers 24. I'm looking through right now. I just saw it. Numbers 24, 17 to 19. So it says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. He will crush the foreheads of Moab, the skulls of all the people of Sheth. Edom will be conquered. Seir, his enemy, will be conquered. But Israel will grow strong. A ruler will come out of Jacob and destroy the survivors of the city. So you see like 20 biblical allusions, just like packed. There's not 20, but there's a lot packed into these three verses. And so when the Magi is seeing the star in the east, you can like, it's almost like compressing all this prophecy into that star, and that's what they're looking for.
Yep.
Oh, no, that's cool.
And when we finally get to that story in Matthew, I'm gonna give my understanding of that. I don't think it's a comet. I don't think it has anything to do with like astrological stuff. It's the glory of God.
Yep.
It's the fire that once followed the Israelites in the wilderness. Like
100%.
The imagery of God's glory. It just looks to them like a star.
Yep.
Right? Because it says that the star,
which is kind of what
literally descended, was resting over the child.
Yep.
How does a comet rest over a child? Come on, people.
Which the king
of God.
He completely misunderstood, because he goes basically to his astrologers and to his what's happening. Like, so he misses it too. Everyone misses it.
Exactly.
And it's like you said, it's the presence of Yahweh in that.
But it all goes back to number 24. It's a star, that star language. So.
Yeah, I completely missed that. And then Sayers actually kind of compressed it all into one.
Oh, that's cool.
And showed me, like, oh, this is taking a lot of stuff, a lot of illusion into one. The crushing, the scepter coming out of Judah, the star from the east, and then the Genesis 3:15 language. And so in Matthew and Luke, when you see the star, it's it's the gospel writer's way of saying that, like, that's what those prophecies pointed to, was this point right here.
Oh, great reference. And that's what this season's all about, is finding those things that point to Christ. And thank you, Dorothy Sayers, for that.
And a lot of people before her too. This is, I think, a lot of not Jewish commentary, but they kind of bring this out, a lot of the allusions. This is maybe a call out for a lot of evangelical pastors and Reform. You should be reading a lot more Jewish commentaries than you are. Good Jewish commentaries, but some of them are really strong on interbiblical allusions.
Yep.
They catch a lot of stuff that we miss.
Yep.
They don't bring it to the New Testament, which is wrong, but they catch a lot of inner Old Testament stuff that we miss.
I also find it like really interesting and cool. I know "cool" is not a theological word, but just
cool's pretty theological. I like cool.
That
you could say awesome. That's pretty theological.
Awesome. Yeah. Awe. There we go. That's where it comes from. The king of Moab and Balaam are definitely not Christian. They're definitely not people of Israel. They're enemies of God, and God still intercedes and interacts with them.
Yep.
With what
So,
happens, that happens to Abraham too. Abraham talks to the Pharaoh in Genesis 12, and he talks to Abimelech. He talks to a few other people who are, as far as we know, or at least not explicitly mentioned, not of God's people, and
mhm.
yet they still point to Abraham. It's like, hey man, you're doing some bad stuff.
Some commentaries even talk about Balaam as in a very early example of a Gentile who believes in the Lord because he obeys
True.
and he listens to God, the
True.
Lord.
Okay.
So I'm not convinced of that, but
Yeah.
there are people that make that argument that he
Yeah.
is, he's
It's
a
at
Gentile,
least
he's an outsider. Yeah.
it's at least like a possible interpretation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
But regardless, yeah, the Lord uses, in the case of Balak, he uses Balak's like, who's a Gentile, who's an outsider. He uses his like bad intentions
Yeah. Yeah.
for good. Like
Yeah.
the Lord,
Yeah.
as Romans 8 tells us, like the Lord
Yep.
turns all things for good for those who love him, right? So
Yep. Absolutely.
it's an example of the
He
like the
wants to defeat
overarching
Israel through a curse, and yet he is
Yep.
through his donkey, the prophecy is kind of further fulfilled and further pointed forward.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the Lord shows like, the Lord's overarching providence and care and ability to turn even wickedness to good, like is shown in that story.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's what I was getting at too, is just the level of comfort we should feel hearing these stories of God's providence.
Yep.
Is just so helpful because
Yep.
now this is another event and thing that happens in Numbers that's pretty significant, but is there any significant ties or backdrop to the spies now that were sent out, and one from each tribe, so that's 12, but
Yep.
then there's only 2 spies that come back with belief, and that's
Yep.
Caleb and Joshua. The rest, the
Yep.
10 others say, hey, no, we can't win, we can't get to the promised land, it's too dangerous. But Caleb and Joshua come back and they say, no, we have belief, we can succeed, we have faith. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, at least kind of on the surface level, you get a connection with Joshua and Judges. And so, because Joshua and Caleb play a pretty big role in a lot of Joshua, the book of Joshua, at least Joshua 15. And then they kind of begin Judges 1 to like 3. There's a lot of Joshua's the beginning of it. He dies. His death is recorded in Judges 1. And then Caleb is referenced in Judges 3. So there's at least on surface level, there's connection between Numbers, Joshua, and Judges.
Oh, okay. Danny, anything else?
Yeah, just like point it to Hebrews 3 and 4. There's this whole discussion of rest. Yep. And so even when Joshua brings the Israelites, Joshua, one of the 2 spies that gave the good report, right? Who believed, who makes it into the promised land, who's the leader after Moses dies. Hebrews 4:9 says, even if Joshua was even if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day to come. And so then there is a Sabbath rest. Sabbatismos is the Greek term there. There's a Sabbath rest still for the people of God. And so the whole like exhortation in Hebrews is to believe in the promises of the Lord, just like Joshua and Caleb did. So, and knowing that the one who's come, our Joshua, Jesus, Yehoshua, he has brought us rest. He says, come to me, all who labor, who are heavy laden, I will give you rest. So
Matthew 11:29. Yep.
All those promises are fulfilled in him.
So you're saying we shouldn't be looking for a land somewhere in Jerusalem to see all these prophecies come back into, with all these wars and rumors and wars and earthquakes? This is not.
Oh boy.
Are you sure? Are you sure, Danny? Are you against all the dispensational interpretations out there?
Have me on for a second
lot of it
season.
rests on this land stuff too.
We'll have to do a second season on millennialism.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Because they look at this land, and the thing is, like, the land itself is a sign of the true land of heavenly kind of new creation. Like, yes, we're looking at this land, is what God promised us, but the ultimate promise is in the new creation, the new heavens and new earth, which that's what we ultimately believe in and look forward to.
Yep. And the land the Israelites are in right now is not even the land that
Not even the same place.
the Lord described.
Yeah.
The Lord described it from the river Euphrates all the way to the Mediterranean. Like that's the way it's described in terms of even when Solomon gave them rest, like the land was so much more expansive than this little parcel they have today. So, you know, I mean, it's just that's why we can't equate the geopolitical status of the nation of Israel, modern state of Israel, with the Israel of God and even the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So it's just there's a lot of confusion there.
Yep.
And I would even add too, Moses was a covenantal theologian because he prays to God to be faithful to the promise given to Abraham. So he sees that covenantal promise of the Abrahamic covenant and how it's applied to him, and he's not a separate thing that he's trying to do. He sees himself as the Abrahamic covenant moving forward.
Yeah. Even though Moses himself does not enter that land.
Correct.
That's right.
Believes.
That's right.
Yeah. He believes that, even the land to come is pictured in the land in which they're going into.
And that whole generation, the Exodus generation, including Moses, the tragic part is because of that disobedience, and God says, okay, well, I won't let this generation enter the promised land, but your children will. So
they also don't, I mean, we'll get into this in the historical books. They get into the promised land, but they definitely don't stay in the promised land. They kind of go in and out multiple times.
And they actually, and even when they get in, they don't do exactly what God said, which
they don't do anything of what God says. Yeah.
So they're in.
Even in the book of Joshua, when
like
they're
not really
Canaan,
doing,
they don't destroy the altars. They loot, they take stuff, they keep what they're not supposed to be keeping.
That's right.
Even when they don't completely purify the land, and because the temple, which is what they're supposed to be setting up, is not set up until way later because of their disobedience.
That's why they're stiff-necked people, is what he says.
I mean, the temple doesn't come until First Kings, which is way later than the book of Joshua.
Yeah. I mean, what we see too is God sends partial acts of judgment, but much more grace, and keeps his promises despite rebellious and complaining people. So people
could say one covenant of grace, multiple administrations, that this covenant of grace underlies all things, regardless of our disobedience, that the covenant of grace is where the promise is fulfilled and found out, not in our performance.
Well, and there's still his people still face consequences and
temporal consequences. In some cases, those who are outside the faith, eternal consequences. But there's definitely temporal consequences, like exile from the land. All this stuff is temporary.
And I could see that to the third mark of the church, of how this is still his people, but there is, what is that third mark of the church that we see?
Discipline of the church.
Discipline.
Third mark. But you see the visible, invisible distinction. Even all of Israel, like Paul says in Romans 9, is still not Israel. It's not the pure Israel. It's still a mixed community, even at this point.
But there's still discipline happening, but it's promise fulfilled.
Chastisement or kind of judgment.
Perfect. I mean, that wraps up all the stuff that I have. Anything else to? Oh, actually, last question to bring it all home. Is kind of repetitive, but the mother promise. We want to always end every episode on Genesis 3:15 and how it's developed to this book that we're talking about today with Numbers.
Danny, why don't you kick this off, since you've got to preach this on Sunday, or at least you have to go through Bible study on this.
It seems like it's in Numbers. It seems like the seed of the serpent is winning.
Kind of does. Yep.
Because
you got a lot of military censuses, but then a ton of rebellion after each census.
But there's also glimpses of the seed of the woman's victory, like we just mentioned from the story of Balaam, right? The prophecy of Balaam. So there definitely are glimpses and temporary, like little, the light is entering into the darkness and showing us like what's going to come. So, we still have hope, and we're still looking forward to that coming, that seed to come, who's going to, ultimately do all the things that these particular Israelites couldn't do, even Moses.
Israel's still growing and multiplying the land, but it's not righteousness necessarily that's growing and multiplying. It is still rebellion and wickedness, and yet the mother promise is still undergirding all these things, regardless of how terribly Israel, and you could say regardless of how terribly we do, the promise of God is still true, that we are his people and he's our God.
Yeah, that wraps up everything I got. So Peter, want to close us out with where to find you guys? And
yeah, so you can find me at Redeemer OPC in Santa Maria, California. We have Sunday school at 9:45, which I'm technically kind of using this in our Sunday school. So seeing Jesus in the Old Testament, I'm double dipping. So if you want to get actually a little bit kind of more into the weeds, Sunday school at 9:45, and then our Sunday service is at 11. And we're at this place called Temple Bethel, which is like northern Santa Maria. But yeah, you can find me there. And Danny, where can they find you?
Cool. Yeah. Oceanside United Reformed Church. I've got my Dutch hat on today. If you haven't already seen that, my Holland hat. So right. Dutch Reformed all the
we have a 95-year-old Dutch lady in our church, and she's the most Dutch person I've ever met in my entire life. It is fantastic.
Well, but does she eat king mints or Wilhelmina mints during the sermon?
I'm gonna have to ask her that question.
That's the question, you know.
But she the thing that she does that I've heard all. Sorry to derail you, but she always yeah. Which I've always heard. It's like a Dutch thing for some reason. I don't know why, but it is.
So yeah, people can find me at Oceanside United Reformed Church down here in Carlsbad, sunny San Diego, California. Sunday mornings we meet at 10 a.m. for worship, Holy Communion service, preaching through the whole Bible in end of 2023, and then when this is airing 2024, so like one book of the Bible per Sunday, giving a huge overview, which has been really fun. And then we have Sunday school. After that, we have an evening service at 5, preaching through the Heidelberg Catechism. And by the time this airs, in the Psalms, we'll be in the Psalms in the evening service at 5. So nice. 10 and 5 on Sundays, and then we have midweek stuff like the men's group. I do a pastor's Bible study through the Book of Numbers that starts in January.
Nice.
That started in January when this airs.
That's so, right.
Yeah, Oceanside URC. OceansideURC.org is a website. You can find me on social media. So looking forward to meeting you.
I forgot to add, I'm going through, at this point, I should be like middle of John, like John 10-ish. I've been preaching through the Gospel of John.
Nice.
Trying to figure out, I might do Leviticus or Ecclesiastes. I haven't decided yet what I want to do. I'm going to talk to the session and congregation. But yeah, so that's what I'm preaching through. So Nick, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm a member at Trinity Orthodox Presbyterian Church. My pastor is John Morsh. It's in Dana Point, California, and service is at 9:30 a.m. at Palisades Elementary School.
You have a catechism service, don't you, too?
Yeah, so we do catechism service at 5 p.m. on Sundays, and then we do adult Sunday school right after the sermon as well. So
gotcha. Cool.
Yep.
Well, and then next week, hopefully you guys enjoyed Numbers, and it maybe brought out like some excitement to read the book of Numbers, maybe for the first time in a lot of people's lives, where you see the gospel straight through and maybe more allusions and interconnections in this. And then next week we got Deuteronomy, so the last book of the Pentateuch. Yeah, or if you're you see the sixth book, the what is it called? The Hexateuch. Some people call it the Hexateuch. Well, I see 5 books, but we'll do Deuteronomy, end of the Pentateuch after this, which is not really chronological, but we'll go through Deuteronomy next time. So
and then we'll enter the man with no parents.
That's
Joshua, the son of none.
Yes, there you go.
Total biblical dad joke.
No, I was about to say that's like Nick has got to end it with the dad joke. That's just the way. That's the way things end. Cool.
Or the son of a nun. We're not sure, right?
Oh, yeah. There we go.
That's right. Cool. All right. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, guys. See ya.